500 students were in that courtyard, and not one of them could explain what they saw. Not clearly, not in a way that made logical sense. Some tried. They described it to friends, to family, to anyone who would listen, but the words always fell short. Language had no container for what happened in those 10 seconds. The challenger remembered nothing after the third second. He told people that later, quietly, privately, with a look in his eyes that wasn't embarrassment. It was something closer to awe. The footage was never released. The university buried it. The witnesses carried it in their chests, like a secret too heavy to share and too important to forget. This is the story of what happened that afternoon in Oakland, 1967, when a man twice Bruce Lee's size stepped forward from a crowd of 500 people and decided to prove something to the world. He proved something, all right, just not what he intended. You have to understand the climate first. America was restless. The martial arts world was fragmented, proud, and fiercely territorial. Schools competed not just for students, but for legitimacy, for the right to call their system supreme. Every sifu, every sensei, every grandmaster had disciples who believed their lineage was untouchable. And then there was Bruce Lee. He had no traditional school backing him, no ancient lineage etched in calligraphy above his door. He was 26 years old, barely 135 pounds soaking wet, and he was teaching a style he invented, Jeet Kune Do, to anyone willing to learn, regardless of race, regardless of background. That last part was the real problem. In certain circles, what Bruce Lee was doing wasn't just unconventional, it was considered a betrayal. Traditional Chinese martial arts had an unspoken law. You don't teach the secrets to outsiders. You don't open the temple doors to Guilo, foreigners. You keep the knowledge inside the bloodline, inside the culture, inside the walls. Bruce Lee opened every wall he touched. The traditionalists hated him for it. Not quietly, loudly, with letters and warnings and intermediaries showing up at his school bearing messages that ranged from politely threatening to openly hostile. Some challenges were delivered formally. Others arrived as whispers, rumors, men sharpening their pride against his name in dark rooms, telling each other that someone needed to shut that boy down. His name kept growing anyway. He'd been invited to demonstrate at Ed Parker's Long Beach International Karate Championships 2 years earlier. The footage from that demonstration had spread through the martial arts community like fire through dry grass. People who hadn't believed the stories, the 1-inch punch, the 2-finger push-ups, the speed that cameras struggled to catch, saw it and went quiet. Disbelief had a shelf life. After Long Beach, it expired fast. So the challengers came more frequently now. Some arrived through official channels, men representing schools, organizations, philosophies. Others were more personal, more hangry. The man who stepped forward in Oakland that afternoon was named Marcus Chin. That's not his real name. His family asked that it never be published, and some courtesies survive decades, but the description of him is accurate. He was 24 years old, 6 feet and 2 inches tall, 223 pounds of trained muscle. He had studied Hung Gar Kung Fu since he was 8 years old. He had never lost a challenge match, not once, not even close. He had a teacher who despised Bruce Lee with an almost religious intensity, a man who had been publicly dismissed by Lee during a demonstration as practicing swimming on dry land, meaning beautiful, useless movement with no combat application. That teacher carried the insult like a wound. He had been sharpening Marcus Chen for 2 years, telling him, "You are the answer. You are the one who ends this." Marcus Chen believed it completely. He was not stupid. He was not reckless. He was disciplined, technically gifted, and genuinely dangerous. If you put him against 99% of the men in that courtyard, he would have dismantled them methodically, efficiently, without breaking a sweat. The problem was the 1%. The demonstration had been organized by a student association at a Bay Area college. They'd invited Bruce Lee to speak about his philosophy of martial arts, to demonstrate technique, and to answer questions. It was meant to be educational, calm, collegiate. 500 students had gathered in the open courtyard, an amphitheater-style space with stone steps rising on 3 sides. The October sun was flat and pale. The air smelled like cut grass and someone's leather jacket warming in the afternoon light. Bruce Lee arrived without ceremony. No entourage, no dramatic entrance. He walked in from a side gate with 2 of his students flanking him loosely, carrying a duffel bag. He was wearing a plain dark jacket over a white shirt. He looked, and this is the word most witnesses used when describing that moment, ordinary.
That was always the thing about him in person. The screen made him electric, the legends made him mythic. But standing in a courtyard in Oakland in 1967, Bruce Lee looked like someone's sharp-eyed older brother, compact, alert, slightly amused by everything, as if the world were running a joke only he'd heard the punchline to. He shook hands with the organizers, smiled at the crowd, made a small joke about the cold that earned a nervous laugh from the assembled students. They were all watching him with that particular intensity people reserve for someone they've heard extraordinary things about, the hunger to confirm or deny the legend with their own eyes. He began speaking. His voice was clear, direct, slightly accented. He talked about martial arts not as a collection of techniques but as a philosophy of movement, about how the body was capable of extraordinary things when the mind stopped interfering. He talked about water. He always came back to water. Be formless, be shapeless, like water. Students leaned forward. Some took notes. A few in the back were whispering to each other, craning their necks. Marcus Chen was standing near the middle of the crowd, arms crossed, jaw set. He had been there since before Bruce arrived. He had gotten there early, positioned himself carefully, not at the front, not at the back, the middle, where his voice would carry to every side when the moment came. He had rehearsed what he would say. He had rehearsed what would happen after. His teacher had told him, make it public, make it impossible to ignore or explain away, do it in front of everyone. So he waited, coiled, patient in the way that only barely contained aggression can be patient. Bruce Lee was mid-sentence, describing the principle of intercepting the fist, when Marcus Chen uncrossed his arms and stepped forward.
The crowd shifted before he even spoke. Something in the way he moved announced itself. Shoulders square, weight forward, the unmistakable posture of a man who has already made a decision and is now simply executing it. I want to challenge you. His voice was loud, designed to be loud. He needed those 500 people to hear every syllable. The murmuring in the crowd dropped to nothing, replaced by a thick, pressurized silence, the kind that gathers in the air before something irreversible happens. Bruce Lee stopped speaking. He turned toward the voice, found the face, looked at it for a moment. I've been sent here, Marcus Chen continued, and he let those words carry their full implication. I represent something, someone. This is not random. To show these students what real Kung Fu looks like. Traditional Kung Fu, not this. He paused, and the pause was a weapon. Mixed up street philosophy you're selling. Someone in the crowd sucked in a breath. A few people shifted away slightly, unconsciously, creating a loose circle of space around Chen that the crowd seemed to generate by instinct, like a body forming a bruise. Bruce Lee's expression didn't change. That was the first thing people noticed. Not anger, not surprise, not the defensive stiffening you'd expect from a man who had just been publicly insulted in front of 500 people. His face stayed exactly the same, calm, slightly attentive, with that faint undercurrent of amusement still present in the corners of his eyes. He set down what he was holding, slowly. What's your name? He asked, conversational, genuinely curious. It doesn't matter, Chen said. It matters to me, Bruce Lee said simply. Another silence. Chen hadn't expected that. He'd expected defensiveness, provocation, posturing, the response of a man defending his ego. Instead, he was getting something that felt almost like courtesy, and he didn't know what to do with it. Chen, he said finally. Bruce Lee nodded. Mr. Chen, a beat. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing you fight me, here, now, in front of your students. Chen spread his hands, a gesture that encompassed the crowd, the courtyard, the entirety of the moment he'd constructed. Let them see if what you teach is real. The crowd had gone so quiet you could hear the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside the courtyard walls. Bruce Lee looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the crowd. 500 faces, all turned toward him, waiting. Some of them frightened, some of them thrilled, most of them caught in that airless space between the two. He looked back at Chen. All right, he said. Just that. No flourish, no dramatic declaration. Just a single quiet word that landed in the silence like a stone dropped into still water. All right. The crowd erupted, not in noise exactly, but in movement, that collective shifting and repositioning of 500 bodies simultaneously trying to get a better view. The stone steps filled quickly, people pressed forward. Someone near the front was telling those behind them to stop pushing. Chen rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles. He was moving through his preparation ritual, familiar, physical, grounding. He was good at this. He had done this before. He knew how to enter this space, how to inhabit it, how to let the adrenaline sharpen rather than scatter him. He was 223 pounds of trained will, and he had never lost. He looked across the newly cleared space between them, maybe 20 feet of flat stone courtyard, and he studied Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was removing his jacket, folding it, handing it to one of the students beside him, unhurried, like a man about to paint a fence or plant a row of seeds. He was wearing the white shirt underneath. No padding, no gear. The
The size difference became visible in a new way when the jacket came off. Marcus Chen was enormous by comparison, wide across the shoulders, thick through the chest, with the kind of physical presence that usually made opponents calculate their odds before a single blow was thrown. Bruce Lee looked like he weighed nothing. A student near the back whispered to his friend, "He's going to get killed." His friend didn't answer. Bruce Lee turned back to face Chen. He raised one hand, palm forward, not a combat stance yet, a gesture. "Mr. Chen," he said, still in that same conversational tone, "before we do this, do you understand that once we begin, I won't be able to stop what happens?" It was a strange thing to say. Not a threat, not a boast. The delivery was almost apologetic, like a mechanic telling a customer their car is going to make a sound during the repair. Chen narrowed his eyes. "I've been training for 16 years, he said. "I know," Bruce Lee said. And something in those two words, the flatness of them, the complete absence of doubt, landed differently than anything else that had been said in that courtyard. A few people near the front noticed the change on Chen's face. A flicker, gone quickly, but it had been there. The gap between them was 20 feet. Bruce Lee settled into a stance. Not a wide, planted, traditional stance. Something fluid, compact, asymmetrical in a way that was hard to categorize, weight slightly forward, hands in precise angles that didn't correspond to any school's classical form. It looked almost casual. It was not casual. Marcus Chen's teacher had told him about this. Don't be fooled by the looseness. That's the trap. Stay disciplined. Close the distance carefully. Use your power, your reach, your weight. Chen settled into a stance. Hung guard, rooted, low, immovable as a mountain. The crowd had stopped moving. 500 people, not one sound. The October light fell flat across the courtyard. Bruce Lee's eyes were completely still, and Chen realized, in the precise moment before movement began, something that no training had prepared him for. He could not read this man at all. Every opponent Chen had ever faced gave something away in the final second before engagement. A breath, a micro-tension in the shoulders, a subtle shift of weight that telegraphed intention. His 16 years had been spent learning to read exactly these signals, to intercept them, to answer violence before it arrived. Bruce Lee's body said nothing. It was like standing across from water. Chen launched forward. 3 seconds later, everything changed. He closed the distance with a leading right, heavy, precise, aimed at the center of Lee's chest with the full weight of his body behind it. Not a tentative strike, a statement, the kind of blow that had ended confrontations before they truly began. The stone under their feet was silent. The crowd was silent. The blow landed on nothing. Not a block, not a parry. Bruce Lee simply wasn't there anymore. Moved in a direction that Chen's nervous system hadn't processed as possible. A sideways displacement of maybe 8 inches that shouldn't have been enough but somehow was everything. And then, contact.
Not a full strike. Not yet. A touch. That's the only word for it. Bruce Lee's left hand made contact with Chen's forearm, barely, glancingly, the way a musician's finger grazes a string before committing to the note. It lasted less than 1/10 of a second. But it was enough to read him. That was the thing nobody in the crowd understood. That wasn't an accident of movement. That was information gathering at a speed the human eye couldn't fully register. In that fraction of a second, Bruce Lee felt the tension in Chen's arm, the direction of his committed weight, the muscular signature of what was coming next. He knew everything he needed to know. Chen recovered fast, faster than most men would have. He planted, pivoted, came back with a left hook that whistled through the October air with genuine ferocity. This was not a man flailing. This was trained, calibrated violence, executing exactly as designed. It found nothing. Again. Bruce Lee moved with it, not away from it, not backward, but around it, a circular displacement that seemed to bend physics slightly, as though he existed in a slightly different version of the same space Chen was occupying. The hook passed so close that 2 students in the front row swore they felt the air move from where they were standing. The crowd made a sound, not words, just a collective exhale, 500 diaphragms releasing at once. Chen felt it then, the first real signal. Not fear, he was too disciplined for fear, but something adjacent, a recognition, arriving unwelcome, that the map he had been given for this territory was wrong. His teacher's instructions had assumed a certain kind of opponent, an opponent who occupied space in a predictable way, an opponent whose movements followed some version of logic that 16 years of training could decode. This was something else entirely. He pressed forward, because that was the instruction. Use your power, use your weight, don't let him dance. He drove in with a combination, right, left, right, tight, economical, the kind of combination that inspiring had never failed to back an opponent against a wall.
Bruce Lee didn't go backward. He went through the combination. Not through it recklessly, not charging into the blows, through it precisely, moving in the exact angles between each strike, the narrow corridors of safe space that existed for fractions of seconds between Chen's attacking limbs. It was like watching someone walk through a closing door over and over again, always catching it at the last possible moment, never once catching the edge. Except there was no door. There was a 223-pound man throwing everything he had. 7 seconds had passed. Later, days later, weeks later, years later, witnesses would try to describe what they saw in the 8th second. They would fail, consistently. The language just wasn't built for it. The closest anyone came was a student named Raymond Yi, who was standing 12 feet away on the second step of the amphitheater's stone risers. He had been watching with the focused attention of someone who had studied martial arts himself for 3 years, enough to know what he was looking at, not enough to fully process it in real time. What Raymond Yi said was this: "I saw him decide." That's it. That's all he could give you. Not, "I saw him strike." Not, "I saw him move." He saw him decide, as if the decision itself was visible. As if Bruce Lee's intention became physical before his body acted on it, a ripple through the air, a change in the quality of the light, something that registered in Raymond Yi's peripheral nervous system a half-second before his eyes confirmed it. Here is what the body of the event looked like, assembled from 17 accounts. Chen overcommitted on a forward drive. His right shoulder dropped 3 degrees too far. His left heel lifted a fraction off the stone. A tiny structural compromise. The kind of thing that in a normal sparring match wouldn't matter. The kind of thing that against 99% of opponents would have no consequence whatsoever. Bruce Lee saw it the instant it happened. He was already moving before the compromise fully registered in Chen's born nervous system. That's the part that bends comprehension. The response came before the error had completed itself. He wasn't reacting to what Chen did. He was responding to what Chen was about to do, reading the body's intentions from the body's preliminary signals with an accuracy that felt less like skill and more like prophecy. His right hand came forward. Not a punch. Not exactly. A striking configuration that Jeet Kune Do practitioners call a straight blast, but that description makes it sound mechanical, procedural, when the reality in that courtyard was the opposite of mechanical. It was organic, inevitable, like watching a wave complete itself. Contact came at the solar plexus. One strike. The sound it made was, and every witness accounts for this separately, as if they can't quite believe they're reporting it, soft. Not the crack of bone, not the thunder of a heavy blow. Something almost gentle, a compressed specific impact that sounded like a book being closed firmly. Marcus Chen stopped, completely. His body did not fly backward the way fight scenes and movies promise. He did not crumble dramatically. He simply stopped. All motion, all momentum, all forward intention, like a film cut to freeze frame. 223 pounds of trained forward force hitting an invisible wall and going nowhere. For 1 full second he stood there, still, eyes wide. Then his legs gave way. Slowly, with a kind of reluctant dignity, like a building settling into its foundation, Marcus Chen went down to one knee. His right hand came out and found the stone floor. He knelt there in the pale October light, breathing hard, staring at a fixed point somewhere in the middle distance. He was not unconscious. He would say later, privately, to someone he trusted, that he wished he had been, because being conscious meant fully experiencing what he was experiencing, which was the complete and total short-circuiting of his body's ability to respond to instruction. His mind was sending signals. His body had stopped receiving them. Everything between his chest and his legs had gone to static. 10 seconds. Start to finish. 10 seconds from the moment Bruce Lee settled into his stance to the moment Marcus Chen's knee touched stone. The courtyard was silent for a long time. Not the performative silence of a crowd holding its breath, the deeper silence of 500 people trying to process something that didn't fit the available categories. Bruce Lee walked to where Chen was kneeling. He crouched down, not standing over him, crouching beside him, getting to his level. He said something. Nobody standing more than 5 feet away could hear what it was,
The witnesses near the front, the ones who tried to read his lips, who strained to catch syllables in the still air, none of them agreed on the exact words. Ever it was, it made Marcus Chen, who was not a soft man, close his eyes for a moment and nod slowly. Bruce Lee stood up. He walked back to where his jacket was folded. He picked it up. He looked at the crowd, 500 faces still frozen in that particular expression of people who have witnessed something that will reorganize their interior landscape, and he said in a voice that was completely normal, completely conversational, "Does anyone have questions about what they just saw?" The silence held for another 3 seconds. Then someone laughed, not mockingly, the helpless laugh of a person whose nervous system is releasing pressure it doesn't know what else to do with. That broke something in the air, and then other people were laughing too, and then someone started clapping, and then the courtyard filled with sound the way a room fills with light when someone opens a window. Bruce Lee smiled. Not the smile of a man savoring victory, the smile of a man who has made his point and is genuinely pleased that the lesson landed. The rumors started that evening. They moved through the Bay Area martial arts community the way rumors always moved in that world, fast, distorted, growing in the telling. By midnight, the story had Chen being thrown 20 feet across the courtyard. By the following week, the crowd had grown to 1,000. By the following month, there were 3 different versions circulating, each one more operatic than the last, and the people who had actually been there were beginning to lose track of which details they remembered and which details they had absorbed from someone else's account. The university, quietly, without explanation, declined to release the footage from the event camera that had been set up near the stone steps. The students who operated it were asked to hand over the reel. They did. It was never seen again. The official explanation, offered once and never repeated, was that the footage was unclear. Marcus Chen disappeared from the martial arts circuit. Not dramatically. He didn't renounce training, didn't shave his head, didn't give any exit interviews. He simply stopped appearing at events, stopped competing. His teacher waited for him to come back with fire in his eyes and the need for another attempt. He never came back. 17 years later, a martial arts journalist tracked down someone who knew him, asked about that afternoon in Oakland, asked if Chen ever talked about it. The contact thought for a moment, then said, "He talks about it the way people talk about something that changed their religion. Carefully, like the words might break it."
The students who were there, the ones who stayed, who went home that evening and sat with what they'd witnessed, began to change. Not all of them, but many. They started asking different questions about their own training, about the difference between learning forms and learning truth, about whether the beautiful patterns they had memorized were preparations for real movement or substitutions for it. Some of them sought Bruce Lee out, knocked on the door of his school in Oakland, asked to learn. He took the ones who were willing to unlearn first. That was always the prerequisite. You had to be willing to empty yourself before he would put anything inside you. The students who came in certain about what martial arts was, certain about which tradition was supreme, certain about what the body could and couldn't do, those students struggled. The ones who came in like water, willing to take the shape of whatever container they were poured into, those students thrived. Word spread differently after Oakland. Before, Bruce Lee's reputation had been built on demonstrations, on the Long Beach footage, on second-hand accounts from people who had seen him work. It was a reputation made of descriptions. After Oakland, something shifted. The descriptions became inadequate. People who had been there stopped trying to explain what they'd seen and started simply saying, "You would have had to be there." And the people who heard that, the specific gravity of that refusal to reduce it to language, came away more affected than they would have been by any description. The legend became something that silence built. That's rarer than you think. Most legends are made of noise. This one was made of what people couldn't bring themselves to say. There is a thing Bruce Lee wrote in his notebooks, private notes, not meant for publication, the kind of thinking a man does when he is working something out for himself, rather than explaining it to anyone else. He wrote, "The man who is really serious, with the urge to find out what truth is, has no style at all. He just faces what is. Just faces what is. Not what tradition says it should be. Not what 16 years of repetition has trained the nervous system to expect. Not the comforting story that size equals power, or that a known lineage equals truth,
or that a style maintained long enough becomes reality. What is? That's what Marcus Chen encountered in that courtyard. Not a technique, not a system. A man who had spent his life stripping away every layer between himself and the pure, unmediated reality of a given moment, and had arrived at a place where the moment was all there was, and within that moment, he was completely, perfectly at home. You cannot prepare for that by memorizing forms. You cannot outmuscle it. You cannot overwhelm it with size, because size is a fixed thing, and size lives in time. It needs a second, needs 2 seconds, needs the ordinary progression of cause and effect to deploy itself. Bruce Lee had learned to live in the space between seconds. That's not poetic license. That's the most accurate description available for what 16 witnesses in a stone courtyard in Oakland saw in the fall of 1967. He had trained his body through thousands and thousands of hours of unglamorous, grinding, solitary work to respond to the present moment at a speed that simply did not leave room for what the opponent had planned. The plan arrived. Bruce Lee had already left. And here is the thing that nobody talks about enough. It wasn't gift. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't the mythology that cinema would later build around him. The man who couldn't be filmed at normal speed. The force of nature who existed outside ordinary human limitation. It was work. Thousands of hours in a room by himself, pushing the body past what comfort permitted. Thinking, constantly, about the nature of movement. Not the appearance of movement, not the tradition of movement, but the living, breathing, biological reality of what one human body does when another human body comes toward it with intent. He loved that question more than he loved winning. That's the part the legend tends to swallow. The man in that courtyard wasn't there to prove superiority. He wasn't there to humiliate Marcus Chen, or dismantle a tradition or plant a flag. He was there because a man had stepped forward in front of 500 people and asked a real question. Is what you teach real? And Bruce Lee had the deepest possible respect for real questions. He answered it the only way he knew how. Completely, honestly, without padding. Marcus Chen got the truest answer anyone had ever given him. It came in 10 seconds, through a single strike, delivered with a precision that bypassed argument entirely, and went straight to the body's own understanding of what had occurred. The body knows. Even when the mind argues, the body knows. Chen's body knew. That's why his legs gave way. That's why he knelt there in the October light, staring at nothing, processing something that his 16 years had not prepared him for, and that no more years could have. He had met the truth. It was smaller than he expected. It was faster than he thought possible. And it was completely, absolutely real. More real than anything he had encountered in a school, a tradition, a lineage, a rivalry. Some people, when they meet the truth, become angry. Marcus Chen became quiet. And quietly, over months, over years, in private, in the space between who he'd been and who the courtyard had forced him to consider becoming, he became something better than the man his teacher had sent to Oakland to prove a point. That might be Bruce Lee's most invisible legacy. Not the films, not the philosophy books, not the demonstrations that circulated on grainy film for decades after his death. The quiet transformations. The men and women who encountered something they couldn't explain, couldn't categorize, couldn't fold back into the comfortable story they'd been telling themselves, and chose, instead of denial, to let the encounter change them. Water doesn't argue with the shape of the container. It simply fills it, and then eventually, it finds the cracks, and flows through anyway. 500 students were in that courtyard. Not one of them forgot what they saw. The ones who went on to teach, passed something down to their own students. Not the story exactly, but the quality the story pointed toward. The willingness to face what is, rather than what tradition promised. The understanding that real skill is not the accumulation of technique, but the subtraction of everything that isn't true. The ones who went on to live ordinary lives, accountants, engineers, teachers, parents, carried it differently, as a private reference point, a fixed star, the thing they returned to when when they needed to remember that the world was capable of producing moments that exceeded expectation entirely. I was there. They would think, not say, think. I was there and I saw it, and no one will ever fully believe me, and that's alright. I know what I saw. 10 seconds in a stone courtyard in Oakland. One man, one strike, one truth delivered without apology, without performance, without a single wasted motion. The legend remembered it as a fight. The people who were there knew it was something else. It was a lesson. The most expensive kind. The kind that cost you everything you thought you knew. And the most valuable kind for exactly the same reason. Bruce Lee never spoke publicly about what happened that afternoon. He didn't need to. The silence was already saying everything.